Tonight, it all starts with Marvel's Captain America 75 Heroic Years right now.
Cap was chosen because of his heart.
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right.
He fights for the underdog, people who are being bullied.
He had this charisma that immediately people latched onto.
He was an icon.
I wish to hell I'd have been Captain America.
It's just a guy with a shield. That was something that was really compelling.
What's great about the Marvel heroes is that they're interesting without their superpowers.
Nobody can touch the energy that's in Kirby Pages.
That's the look he was going for.
The biggest impact comic book hero of all time.
He represents the figure that we needed.
He was a great character, ultra patriotic.
The comic book version of a founding father.
There's an action, there's an energy to it.
It was big, it was in your face.
That's what you wanted to see.
But there's more to the story than that.
They say you should never judge a book by its cover, for many times it is not the world's biggest, strongest, and fastest on the outside who have the largest hearts. Such was the case with an undersized kid from Brooklyn named Steve Rogers, who would change the course of comic book history in the Marvel Universe. From his first appearance in 1941 to today's blockbuster films, this is Marvel's Captain America, 75 Heroic Years. New York, 1940, America's great melting pot, where our country's finest thinkers, industrialists, and artists converged to forge the true American dream.
Jack Kirby and Joe Simon very much spoke to the American dream.
They were children of Jewish immigrants. They really sort of had to work their way up.
My father grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. They were very poor. They lived in just this little typical tenement all crowded into the one room.
I grew up on some of the rougher neighborhoods.
There were gangs, kids duking out in the streets. It was very rough.
Two young, not terribly large guys. They certainly weren't the kind of image of their heroes.
Most times, a fictional character is based purely on the experiences of that particular author.
Jack wasn't a big guy.
He was feisty. He was a fighter. In that time, you had to be.
Joe lived in a neighborhood where there was ethnic strife.
He got bullied a lot.
Kirby had a dislike for bullies in any form.
Regardless of whether the fact he was going to get beat up or not, he would always step in to help.
You just don't know when to give up, do you?
I can do this all day.
That played a big part in the creation of Captain America, somebody who would take on the bullies.
I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from.
Joe wanted to go to college, and he couldn't get in. They would only take a certain amount of Jews.
A lot of the writers and artists that worked in comics couldn't get a legitimate job in the Mad Men advertising world.
These incredibly talented people denied fair opportunity, and they created some of the greatest American products.
They met at Fox Publishing. Joe got a job at Timely, which is what Marvel was at the time.
Timely Comics was founded in 1939. Martin Goodman was the publisher.
Joe was the editor, and Jack was the de facto art director.
They were brilliant. I mean, Joe and Jack wrote and drew. They worked as a team.
They were different personalities. My father, the little scrappy guy.
Joe was more the guy who concentrated on the business end of it. Jack was always hunched over the drawing boards, working like a demon, 2-3 pages a day.
The minute Joe Simon saw Jack Kirby's artwork, he knew this was something spectacular. How kinetic it was, how it moved across the page. He saw it as the work of a master.
They were very good friends besides being partners.
Jack said, "We're going to move across the street," and Joe said, "Great."
I thought the Kirbys were our cousins.
At that time, the big problem was Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in Germany. I guess that where anybody is from affects the way he writes or draws.
Simon and Kirby, as Jews, they definitely knew what side of the war they were on.
They were very much aware of what was happening to not just Jews, but to everyone.
Martin Goodman wanted some kind of hero comic.
Joe had this idea for a character called the Super American.
They were giving the public something to sort of feed their interest in this situation.
The Times called for a patriotic hero.
This was their way of taking on the Nazi Empire.
Creating this character who would take on Hitler.
They worked on what's the antithesis.
The whole idea of America and what it stood for: thwart evil, fight bullies, defend the downtrodden.
The underdog winning out over the aggressor.
Quintessential ideology of the American dream.
There were so many characters with the word super in their title.
It said Captain America.
Captain America was born.
Captain America was born out of kind of the experiences of the world. Everyone was going through a war.
Martin Goodman, who was afraid that somebody would shoot Hitler before the comic came out.
They had to turn this thing out quick.
Joe and Jack apparently put in a real string of all-nighters.
On the cover of Captain America #1, there is a guy who is wearing the American flag.
Bursting into some Nazi bunker and smashing Hitler with the right cross. That came out, and it was a huge sensation.
That first issue sold 1 million copies. It was so popular.
That cover, while incredibly popular, was also very, very controversial.
We weren't in World War II at that point.
A political statement on the cover of a comic book.
You don't really stop and think about how provocative an image that was. This was a guy who was the head of state of an entire nation, and a nation that was going to war with all the people around him.
Jack and Joe received a lot of hate mail because there were people that felt that Captain America wasn't standing for their ideals.
The American Nazi Party was very strong in New York City. They got a lot of death threats.
There were people actually protesting outside the offices of Timely at that time.
Sinister-looking characters hanging around.
LaGuardia actually placed some protection on the Timely Comics offices.
In a country divided, Cap's place in culture was in question, but something was about to happen that would unite the country completely.
State which will live in infamy.
Milk, 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 milk.